Hey guys, welcome to Non-Del Influencers Podcast. As always, your host, Nate Clear. And today I am privileged to have Chris Peirson from Peirson and Patterson join me. For those of you that don't know Chris, she is an absolute RESPA genius. She's also the owner of Peirson and Patterson, attorney firm that also assists in fulfillment services, custodial services, doc platform, and as well as all things e-signing and e-closing. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much.
So, guys, this is really going to be geared towards anybody that's currently a broker looking at correspondent lending and really diving into the details of the recent NAR judgment and what potential opportunities exist. And really, what kind of struck me is, hey, we got to have Chris on our show. Anybody that's a customer of First Funding knows that you get set up with us, you're going to execute your custodial agreement. One of those signatures is Chris Peirson, who we have on with us today. And Chris said, hey, did you see that NAR judgment? And I said, yes, I did. She goes, that's really big for you guys. And so we started having a dialogue about what that meant and what that means for our existing lenders, but more importantly for our prospective lenders. But before we dive into that, Chris, can you bring our listeners up to speed on what it is we're talking about when we're referring to the NAR judgment?
Yes. What we're talking about is the way that real estate agents sell property. And this kind of goes way back into antiquity with the development of the MLS. And what typically happens is a listing agent lists a property with a seller. And when they list the property with the seller, they negotiate how much of the commission is going to be paid to a buyer's agent. And that's put on the MLS system. As a practical matter, this is what the cases have been about. A buyer's agent is probably not going to be aggressive on marketing a property that isn't listed at about 3% for the buyer's agent percentage of the commission. So effectively, what the court found is that most listing agreements effectively result in the buying agent getting 3% and the listing agent getting a variable fee. And the court found that as being basically inflationary and a form of price fixing, which you are not allowed to do, as we all know, in any form of the industry. Because when they did the statistical analysis, it turned out pretty much every buying agent got between 2.5% and 3%, which is close enough to find some sort of price fixing mechanism. Of course, the real estate agents vigorously disagree, but the jury basically took less than 2 hours to see that there was an issue with the way the buyer agents were being compensated.
Gotcha. And so when we're reading all this new information, right, we saw the big headline, NAR judgment, huge settlement. And then immediately, right, the response from NAR was, we're going to appeal this to the highest level, et cetera. Where do you think that shakes out, and what do you think that timeline looks like?
Well, the main concern that I have is that all of the courts on this have the ability to give some sort of injunctive relief on this buyer agent fee. They're not going to do that till 2024. So right now, everything is sort of in suspense until we know if the courts are actually going to go in and take that form of action, which frankly, one of the courts indicated it was going to do. So that's the sort of Damocles basically hanging over NAR, is what's going to happen if the courts find some sort of injunction on this arrangement. Also, you've got the problem that the Department of Justice has waded in now. They are looking at the case and they are concerned about this occurring in the marketplace. So even if the courts dissolve the cases, the Department of Justice is now looking into it, and President Biden did sign an order basically ordering them to look into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this change sounds very real. If it doesn't come through the court system, then it'll come through some other entity. So I understand, in terms of what happened for the settlement, in terms of these buyer agents essentially being, kind of paid this 2.5%, 3%.
Right.
Just that's the standard. That's the way that it is, and it's just fixed. There's nothing really you can do about it. Let's get rid of that. What do you see in terms of this changing? How does this change real estate practices? How does this change real estate contracts being written? And what does this mean for lenders, for brokers, and their borrowers?
Wall Street obviously is weighted in and has a bunch of very sophisticated scenarios on what they think is going to happen. But I think in all probability, you're seeing real estate agents right now going, we're really going to need representation agreements on the part of the buyer, where the buyer negotiates their fee directly with the agent. And that doesn't mean that the seller cannot pay a percentage of the buyer agent's fee. They can, but it won't be going through the selling agent's commission. The seller will pay it like they do title insurance or appraisal costs as just part of the seller concession.
So it'll just show up as a seller credit then?
Yeah, it'll show up as a seller credit, to handle all or part of the buyer agent's fee. Wall Street does not think maybe 20% of the buyers will be able to pay for a buyer agent in some way. So they're not real optimistic on buyers executing buyer rep agreements, and they're more knowledgeable than me. So, but I do think that sellers are probably going to say, well, I don't want to pay 3% towards the buyer agent, but I'm not unwilling to pay 1%. Because I know that it'll get me a higher price on my house if I have buyer agents aggressively marketing my property.
So what is this? So for the seller's agent, right? They're kind of in the same situation that they've somewhat traditionally been in, right? They're still going to go out there, solicit sellers to list their home with them. And they're still going to negotiate on their side in terms of the compensation for listing that property, but it's the section that's always been the 3% or the 2.5% that would go towards the buyer's agent. That essentially doesn't get written into the contract.
Well, it probably won't. I mean,
Yeah.
I think when this really disseminates, and again, I have to keep quoting Wall Street. Sorry about
Sure.
that.
No,
Wall Street
you're good.
did a lot of research on the issue, and they think that's exactly what's going to happen, that the listing agent is going to list, they'll negotiate potentially some smaller fee paid directly by the seller to the buyer agent, but they're probably not going to get the 2.5 to 3 that they've been used to when all this plays out. Now, let me say another thing that Wall Street said that I found was very interesting. They said that the market may not quickly adjust to this, that there may take time for the consumers to become knowledgeable about their ability to negotiate a commission amount. So they said, we don't really know if this is going to, go through the industry and really be a game changer. But I think they're hedging their bets. I think aggressive listing agents are going to go out and say, I'll list you for 4%. And that's probably gonna happen fairly quickly.
Well, there's tons of competition that's already out there, right? I mean, like the statistics that are being thrown around in terms of, the overcapacity in even the lending side of the business in terms of, personnel. It's bleak, right? There's a lot of talk of there needs to be additional contraction in the labor force on the mortgage side. Well, if we're hearing that, then certainly it's true on the other side in terms of real estate agents, et cetera. So you're going to need something that's going to set you aside from all the other competition. Not to mention, right, the problem that we've continued to see and will continue to see in terms of just overall being inventory for houses to be listed for sale or for buyers to go purchase.
The way Wall Street puts it is there's going to be a smaller commission pool.
Right. The pie has gotten smaller.
The pie is getting smaller for all of us.
That's
it. It's not just the real estate agents. And I do think that this affords what you just said in terms of industry contraction.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be a bit of a game changer, but really Zillow has already started it. Something like over 50% of people now find their properties online, and they contact the listing agent directly, and the listing agent puts them with a buying agent because they have to pay them anyway. Right. So I think that is going to be the true game changer, where the super agent that is on Zillow and Realtor.com is going to be just, really powerful in terms of placing borrowers with potential agents or representing them themselves. And right now they have to use a buyer agent because of the way it's structured. Right. You don't have to do it if this gets implemented.
Yeah, because that seems to be the more natural progression from where I sit, in that if you can find your house online, right, the one that you want, and you're like, absolutely, that's it, and you just need somebody to show it to you. If you have the ability to just reach directly to that listing agent who's going to know the most about that property anyway, to then go show you, and then at the end of the day, you're like, yep, this is the one that I wanted. Right? Like there's not a ton more work to be done.
Again, that's what Wall Street says. They say that this is going to reduce the friction in the industry on buying a house. And that's what they're predicting. I personally think that's where it's going to go.
Gotcha. So as we're peeling into this, right, I think that there's some natural solutions for the buyers, right? So if you're a buyer and that you're able to go direct to a listing agent, or even negotiate your buying agent fees, et cetera, and am I getting that correct too? Is that part of the solution for buyers? Is that they may seek representation, but instead of just reach out to your brother, sister's mother about, or your brother-in-law's mother, or some, whatever that analogy is, that it's just already assumed that those costs are going to be incurred by the seller? Are they now going to, when they reach out to those buyers agents, will those buyers then essentially be asked, okay, cool, this is what my cost to show you these houses are. This is what it is for me to issue a contract. This is so on and so forth. Or what do you think that looks like?
Well, first of all, I think a buyer's representation agreement is fantastic for everybody. I mean, my preference, of course, as a lawyer, is to see buyers paper up. I want to see you get a representation agreement, because then you know where you stand. Right. And the typical buyer representation agreement gives a credit if the seller is going to contribute towards your commission. So you could negotiate something with a buyer agent where you say you agree to pay them, say 1%. And if the seller also agrees to pay 1%, effectively you'll be paying nothing, just like you are today. But it would be negotiated separately and transparently with the seller. And that's the big change. It isn't a hidden cost. It's a cost that's out in the sunlight. And everybody knows what it is, and it's been negotiated. And the buyer gets actual representation, not indirectly from basically what amounts to a seller sub-agent.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's huge. I know that in the home that I purchased, in 2020, The seller had just purchased that home like 6 months previous. COVID lockdown occurred. They had 3 kids, married, both the husband and wife were used to going to work. So the house was perfect for that. But as soon as they were grounded, they both had to work from home. The kids needed to be schooled at home. They're like, there's no way this is going to work, right? So they had to sell the house, and that, to our benefit. But what was interesting to see was that the listing agent also represented them on the buy side for that particular closing. So they got their 6 points there. When they went to go list the house, it was for another 6. And so he was still, that same real estate agent was a listing agent. And then, naturally I had a buyer's agent on it. But in the matter of, I don't know, 7, 8 months, picked up 9% of that. And of course, the property appreciated between the time that they had originally bought it and we had purchased it. So it's just almost 10% of that entire cost, right? Went to the real estate agent. It's
what you're
pretty
talking
remarkable.
about there. Yeah, what you're talking about there is really the super agents.
Yep.
And honestly, 20% of the agents make the deals happen.
Okay.
So, it's the old, what do they call it, Pareto rule. 20% of the agents do 80% of the deals. And you were obviously watching a super agent at work.
Yep.
Or a premier agent, to use another term for them.
Yeah. And so I think what we're going to see here is, some natural, savings, right? To ultimately to the consumer, which is fantastic to see, especially as we, even regardless of everything else that's going on in this world, interest rates, cresting at 8% and coming down a little bit, but still much, much higher than what we've seen, 12, 18 months ago. Any type of savings is going to be a win.
Absolutely. And internationally, our real estate commissions are significantly higher than England, Australia, or the rest of the world. So there's some legitimacy to what you're saying, is we may be, the way we structured it with the MLS may be a little more expensive than perhaps it could be in a free market.
Right. So as this pertains more to brokers and lenders, and this is really kind of the hallmark, right? These are, our listeners are generally brokers that may be interested in correspondent, existing non-delegateds, or even, correspondent lenders that are just looking for, an edge in the marketplace. What's the opportunity through this NAR judgment and what seems to be coming down the pipe here in the next in 2024? What's the opportunity for, say, a broker in this environment?
Well, the problem that a broker has is they're not defined legally as lender. And if you're a lender, then the realtor can put down one of your cards. But if you're broker, you really can't, because you're not a lender. And the rules on steering are you put down 3 lenders card. So what's the definition of a lender? A lender is a entity that has a warehouse line and whose name goes on the note. Right. So basically you've got the equivalent of a credit line. Now, if you're going to be going out and marketing, let's just call them the super brokers or the super real estate agents. Right. The first thing you need to tell them is, I've got a line of credit. I'm not a broker. I'm a lender. When I do a borrower qualification, you can literally take it to the bank because I've got a bank. Right. And that's unbelievably important to builders, and it's unbelievably important to real estate agents to know that your borrower qualification process is backed up by a credit line. And if you're competing against brokers, you should be able to make it clear that your borrower qualification letter doesn't have to be signed off by anybody. You have a credit line. It's good when you sign it. And that's literally gold. It's literally gold.
And that's the deal, right? Is that because as brokers, you're just brokering a credit arrangement between a buyer and a lender. And so there's
you're finding a lender. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So there's no way for you to, position yourself other than, hey, I've got all these lender relationships. Instead, as that, as a non-delegated correspondent or as a correspondent lender, you're solidifying, and this is something, we've been talking about for years and years and years and years, is that you want to solidify to real estate agents, to title, to builders, to buyers, to sellers, et cetera, that you are the lender. Your name's on the closing documents. You're sending your wire to closing, et cetera. So, and thank you for making that distinction, Chris. But what does that mean now, right? Like, what's changed, right? We've been preaching these, that you need to be able to solidify yourself to all these parties in the transaction. But why is it different now as it relates to the judgment?
Because you're probably, let's just be honest.
Yep.
As this goes forward, there's going to be less and less buyer agents, and less pressure on you to approve a particular buyer. And as you move towards listing agents, they are much more interested in property conversion. They want to know that that inventory can be moved. They don't particularly care, let's be honest, who the buyer is, or if they have 3 children, or what their issues are. They have a contractual responsibility to their seller to move that property for the listing price. And that's going to be the pitch that you need to make, is I'm here to move your inventory predictably. And, these heartbreaking little letters of, Sally Sue is a good person, that is not going to work. These people are sharks. They just keep swimming, and they want to know that your buyer is qualified and your buyer can do the deal, and that you're going to get a appraisal that you can literally count on, and not that you have to argue about back and forth with some, let's just be honest, 4 or 5 different lenders. So it's really about reducing deal friction is really what this is. And there's just no better way to reduce deal friction than, frankly, to have a warehouse line. It's the absolute best way to reduce deal friction.
Yeah. And I think that, thank you, Chris, for putting a bow on it, because that I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think that if you're going to be able to negotiate this, and this is something that we're already seeing from our lenders, we're seeing more and more of our lenders, and this has been something that's occurred for really the last few years. More and more lenders are being sought after first before the buyer starts to go talk to real estate agents, because houses have gotten so expensive. And so people want to know, hey, how much am I going to be able to afford, et cetera, et cetera. I think that you're really taking that, instead of, a lender doing the pre-qual and then trying to match them with maybe a buyer's agent that they know. Instead, they can essentially start working on strategies of, who are the power agents that are out there that are getting most of the listings in the area that my buyer's looking in. And I think
absolutely.
Right? And so as that lender, as our independent mortgage lenders are able to solidify themselves in the markets that they're looking to serve, they can use those pre-quals, and they can show their ability to perform, to close on time, to have control over the overall transaction, to win over those relationships with those listing agents. And with this NAR judgment, and with the way the real estate environment's looking to move, they don't have to be necessarily beholden entirely to buyer's agent. They can cut to the chase, and they can, in that way, hopefully save their buyers some money, and really, truth of the matter, even the seller in what they're looking to do.
It's more than that. Let's just be honest. There's 5 borrowers for every house. You got to get them to a house.
Right.
You got to get them to a house. You got to get access to that inventory, however you need to do it. Because what's the good if you have 10 qualified borrowers if none of them can find a house?
Oh, that's it. Right. I mean, that's the big thing, is that it does you no good. And we've got, and I know, a lot of our listeners are probably shaking their head right now saying, Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've got a great pipeline of pre-quals if they could just only find a house. This is the way. This is a great way for our lenders to partner up and find those power brokers, real estate brokers, so that they can get these deals closed, keep their pipelines full, as well as work strategically.
Yes, that's exactly right. Remember, you can't do a loan without collateral.
Yep,
You
that's
need that
it.
collateral.
That's it. That's it. And so I'd like to leave it for our listeners. If you're a broker, you're listening to this, it's not all over, right? I think that, certainly reach out to somebody like First Funding, in terms of, what it takes to get approved for a warehouse line. You might be shocked, that, for a $100,000 net worth, 630 plus credit score for principal owners, you can get kind of an introductory warehouse line. At First Funding, we're happy to help correspondents or brokers make that transition into that correspondent lending model. We can help answer your questions. And Chris, I know that you can help in terms of the back office. Can you tell us a little bit about the fulfillment services at Peirson Patterson?
Well, the main thing to understand is the most important part of your entire loan is the note.
Yep.
And if you remember that amount on the note, the $400,000, that's what you're dealing with. You're basically dealing with money as you move money from point A to point B. So all I can say is, and title insurance does not cover your note. Right. So you want someone handling your collateral who takes it seriously.
Yep.
Because it's serious.
Absolutely is. And that's why we appreciate so much of the support over all the years and currently, and being able to, receipt notes same day, get the proper endorsement done, attach the Bailey, get it shipped timely in a traceable fashion, and as well as follow up on the delivery. Because
it's
they're
really
as good
the
as
most
gold.
important part. It really is. Other than getting a warehouse line, and I can tell you as a RESPA attorney, representing a broker is a nightmare. It's so many barriers in terms of being able to legally defend what you have to do to earn your fee. But you know what you have to do if you're a lender? Prove up they have a warehouse line, and that's the end of your defense.
Right. Well, it's good for everybody to understand and appreciate that kind of importance and the distinction between those roles. Mm-hmm. And I know, Chris, we could go down into a whole rabbit hole in some of the conversations that we had heard last week and all the worries and concerns, but I think this is sufficient for now. I think this gives our lenders a lot to think about in terms of how they approach the new year. And, for the brokers that are out there, what to do in terms of pivoting, opening up a new channel through which you're going to do your business in 2024, so that you can have the most success. Thanks, Chris, for joining us. Guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them in to info@non-delegated.com. Please be sure to share and subscribe this podcast to all your friends, family, coworkers, etc. And we appreciate you for listening. Have a good one.